You're listening to a CNA podcast.
So hey everyone, it's Stephen here and welcome back to Heart of the Matter. Now, before we kick off today's discussion, there is one important thing to note. Today's topic deals with mental health issues, and we have guests who have been through these. So, some of the things they speak about may be distressing or could be a trigger. If this is something that could affect you, we ask for your discretion in listening to this episode, and more importantly, to speak to someone about it. Back to our discussion today, we want to talk about what's causing the rise in mental health issues in Singapore. Because the data shows that mental health in the country has worsened, and there are two groups of people who seem the most affected. The young, that's those aged 18 to 29, who clock in as the highest number who struggle. Then there are those aged between 70 to 79 who recorded the biggest group in the number of suicides. In today's discussion, we speak to people who have been in this situation. We want to hear their story, to understand how they got help, and to discuss what would make things better. In studio with me today, a 23-year-old university student. We'll call her Ray. She first encountered anxiety when she was in primary school.
Hi, I'm Ray.
Mak Kean Loong, he's 44, a father of two teenagers, and he writes openly about his struggles online.
Hi, I'm Mark.
And Chris Wong, a senior clinical psychologist with the Resilience Clinic.
Hi, this is Chris.
Welcome all. Ray, if I may start with you because you fall into the category of Singapore residents who are struggling the most. You were diagnosed with panic disorder at the age of 15, generalized anxiety disorder at 18, major depressive disorder at 19 years old. But your symptoms actually started much earlier when you were in primary school. So please share with us, how do you think all this happened?
Psychologists, psychiatrists will also agree that anyone that is diagnosed with a disorder, there are multiple factors that go into it. For me though, growing up, I did have a bit of a chaotic childhood. There was quite a lot of instability at home. Although I would say that the physical symptoms only came up in my teenage years, I am not sure until now whether the roots of it began when I was really young, during my childhood. But in primary school, I remembered being a child that was easily stressed, even though my parents did not place any pressure on me in studying. But I was just someone that placed a lot of pressure on herself.
Was this primary 3, 4?
It's as early as I could remember. I was from a working class family, also partly because of the instability at home. I always felt like though I was 7, 8 or 9, not in a way to boast, but I felt like I thought a bit differently from my schoolmates in a way that I was thinking about things like money. I was thinking about things like getting good grades in order to do well in life in the future and get a stable job and da-da-da. So I unknowingly carried a lot of burdens.
Sounds like you were almost a bit too mature for your age. Mark, what was your journey like?
I can't share in detail the reasons behind my diagnosis.
When did you first perhaps realize that there was something more?
In 2006, actually, I already started having suicidal thoughts out of the blue. Mm-hmm. You can attribute it to stress, you can attribute it to whatever that was the trigger. But the problem with triggers is that they don't tell the whole story. Triggers usually are the tip of the iceberg. That's always a metaphor or analogy that's used in mental health. There's a whole bunch of stuff underneath.
You said the first sort of thoughts came out of the blue. To help us understand, you had went to school as per normal, graduated, got your degree, had a regular job, started a family, right? Everything seemed okay.
Yeah, I was married, but no kids yet. Kids were on the horizon. We were starting to plan. Yeah, and it's just out of the blue. In 2017, there was a major difference that I was switching jobs and I had just recently started a new job. And I think it was my open inverted commas dream job, that kind of job that I've always been aiming for in my career, that they're going to give me responsibility and to do research and implement things that I've really wanted to implement in the industry. And I was supposed to be like, this is great stuff. Maybe that was the exact same reason that my guard came down and all the backlog of emotions in the jobs I had before that seemed to have overcome me at that point. It was way worse than the first bout. It wasn't just suicidality, it was like I couldn't talk. I spent the day at work trying hard not to cry, and my senior had to pull me aside and say, the criticism I gave you over that job, it's not that bad. And I'm like,
Right.
It's not that criticism at all. I just can't stop.
Were you able to understand why you were feeling this way?
No, I did realize something's a bit off. So I went to my GP, who did see me during O6 for the first bout. He started me off to push me and say, I can't deal with this, so you need to go to the GH and have it looked at. I went back to him and he diagnosed me with adjustment disorder, which is a catch-all phrase for something's not right. It's probably because there's change, But the word depression was thrown out. We did have that discussion. He wanted me to start medication at once. This is a family GP, so I'm very thankful to him because, there's a queue outside.
Yep.
And he took 15 minutes to tell me and convince me that I needed to take a break, even though I had just gotten employed.
Okay.
It was a difficult decision, but I called up my senior, my boss, and they were both very supportive. In that aspect, I can't say that my experience was close to race.
Right. But for you, it was more something happened along the way that changed your life completely. At this point in time now, when you're speaking to us, it's been quite a few years. How are things now?
I need to say first and foremost that I haven't been able to work. The thought of starting to think about work has brought me into tailspins where the emotions are so overwhelming that I cannot actually deal with them. And I have to shut down and I stay at home and I don't do anything. Financially, we're very fortunate. We're very, very blessed because my church and my extended family take care of us. I'm 44. When I started this, I was 38. I had 2 kids back then in primary school. They weren't in secondary school yet. I can't feed them. I can't.
Okay.
So they have been feeding us. With that as the backdrop, it allowed me much more space, much more time to actually work on what really is the issue.
So you say the issue. Do you now recognize what is the issue?
I can't go into too much detail, but it's echoes of childhood. And the funny thing, if you like, is as we fought through all the noise in my head to try and figure out, when I say we, I mean my therapist and me, we never actually linked this particular issue to the collapse itself. So it's not like this issue caused the collapse. The trigger was still that change in job. When the collapse happened, it was just everything was too much.
Even though we use the word trigger here, it's not one single thing that causes. Maybe Chris, you can chime in here. You've heard both of their stories. It's not uncommon from the patients that you deal with. So why do these things happen?
When we try to understand our clients' stories and sometimes the problems that they present with, we know that, as Ray and Mark mentioned, it's not always just a single trigger. We talk about predisposing factors, which were basically things, events that might have predisposed them to developing what they have developed today. Some of these predisposing factors might include a difficult childhood, changes, chaotic childhood, like Ray mentioned, bereavement, abuse, neglect, etc., etc. These accumulate and add up, and throughout our lives, we encounter stresses all the time. For some of us, some of these stresses can be too much to bear until where the point comes and there's this so-called trigger, this known catalyst, it happens. That's when the onset of symptoms become more obvious and people get diagnosed.
So it's always a build-up of things. From both the stories you've shared, it's a multitude of things that perhaps just reach a climax at some point in time. Ray, you were saying that even in primary school, you already felt this burden. When you look back now, can you sort of understand a bit more perhaps why you felt that way?
I wish I could give a very straight to the point answer. Now that I'm 23 and it's been 16 years since I was a 7-year-old, I think it's still a question that I will investigate.
Okay.
Like there's still many layers that I have to dig and process because somehow I don't really want to blame it on someone else. I just don't want to put the blame for my condition on something,
Yeah. To ask you the why. If we all knew why, then a lot of things would be solved more easily. But I think that is the challenge indeed. When you recognized or felt that there was a need, how did you go about getting help? Were you able to speak to people? Did you know what to do, where to go? Who did you turn to first?
So mine's a little bit of an interesting story because I already mentioned my GP and what he did. So along the way, I knew that I cannot afford private help. And then I checked in with the government's stream of help and I didn't know what to do. So I ended up searching directly on IMH website. At that point, there wasn't much information other than the hotlines. And I didn't feel like, yeah, okay, fine, I have suicidal thoughts. It's pretty severe, but I don't think I'm serious enough to actually call those helplines. I did some more research and I found out that if I go to a polyclinic, they will do a referral for me. I can't just go into the hospitals and be like, knock on the door and, can I see a psychiatrist, please? So I did that. They were very kind, mind you, and they put my name in for the referral to the hospitals. But my symptoms got way more severe during that period as well. At the height of my suicidality, I made plans, concrete plans, and Chris will know how severe that is. Nobody knew, but because I had seen the IMH website, I told myself I will call them, I will be honest with them, I will not hang up first, and I'll do what they say. Those were the conditions I laid. So if nobody picked up the phone, if I got disconnected, I'm still going to proceed. I called, they picked up, they listened, and they told me to make my way down to IMH A&E. And I didn't even know that IMH had an A&E that is a mental health A&E. There's no such thing in the region. I tried to do some research after and I couldn't find anything about it. Every other A&E, you go with a broken finger, they will look at it. You go to IMH A&E with a broken finger, they will redirect you. They can't do anything. I walked in myself because my wife had to take care of the kids. And remember, I wasn't telling people. I did message some of my friends. 2 of them rushed down post-haste. But I talked to the doctor there and he refused to let me go.
So they warded you for a few
6 days.
And would you say that saved your life?
Everything saved my life. One single misstep along the way and I wouldn't be in this studio right now.
Well, Ray, you also went through the polyclinic route, right? Because cost is one of the issues. But you were saying it also has some challenges going down that route. What was it for you? What were the difficult parts?
The most difficult part was the loneliness of the journey and not understanding the seriousness of what I was going through, having like chest pains and tight-chestedness in class, for example, and lying on the table and being misunderstood by my teacher that I was lazy. I was just sleeping in class when I was trying to recover by breathing, for example. And it got so serious that thankfully there was the internet. I went on the internet and did some research and I realized that my symptoms firstly have been going on for quite some time. They fall under like generalized anxiety or panic disorder. I decided to take the initiative by going through the polyclinic route. I don't really remember who told me or how I got the notion that I can go there, but I just knew that I wanted to get government subsidy. I knew that by getting a referral from polyclinic, what they did was they wrote a referral for me and they sent me to the Child Guidance Clinic at Health Promotion Board. It is for minors, but Child Guidance Clinic is under IMH.
How old were you at that time?
I was 15.
So you had gone on the internet, looked up your symptoms, and then did you go to the polyclinic and say, hey, I think I'm in this situation?
Yeah, from what I can remember telling the doctor whatever that I was experiencing, I also shared that I used to struggle with insomnia. It passed the 6-month mark. So that was when I knew it was chronic. It was unusual for someone as young as me to be experiencing sleepless nights for such a prolonged period of time. Suicide ideations. That's when the doctor wrote a referral letter.
Did you not feel that you could tell your parents? Were you able to talk to them or to friends?
In my mental health journey, it took a while for my parents to develop some form of understanding. That's when really so many things bottled up. I was repressing a lot of my symptoms and a lot of the discomfort and the emotions that were just bombarding me, everything, everywhere, all at once. When I would come home, if I had any mini meltdown, my father back then would be very angry. That anger kind of shut down my system in a way that I adapted. I conditioned myself to not show emotion.
Well, he probably had no idea and did not understand the situation you were in, right? I mean,
But now that I'm older, I think my dad actually struggled with mental illness, even
himself, you're
even
saying?
himself. It's
I
just
see.
that his generation, there's not enough resources, there's not enough information. He was an alcoholic, a very heavy smoker. So I think he definitely struggled a lot. It's just that he wasn't aware himself.
Hello, my name is Steve Lai,
And I'm Teresa Tang, and we are the hosts of CNA Correspondent.
a podcast that takes you to the heart of the work our correspondents do across the globe.
From China's COVID response to the childcare center massacre in Thailand.
And from the fall of Najib Razak to the rise of Anwar Ibrahim as Malaysia's Prime Minister.
We speak to the people at the reporting front lines.
So if you want to know how the biggest global stories unfold, make sure you follow or subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts.
Chris, one of the things we often hear is that it's very hard for people in this situation to reach out. They keep it all in. And for us on the outside also, sometimes we're not sure what to take note of. Why is it so hard for them to reach out? And what can we on the outside do?
One of the most important factors about the stigma of mental health illnesses or conditions that has really stopped, I think, people from talking about their mental health issues because of the implications, how people will look at them. So that's one. I think the other thing is also the mental health literacy, which, of course, over the years has been better. In the past, I think people just didn't know, and people from the outside also wouldn't know. It can be quite hard to explain that to other people because these symptoms are not visible. Like, it's not like you have a fall, you have a sprain, you have a cut, but it's hard for people outside to understand what it really feels like to feel down, depressed, to be experiencing anxiety all the time. One of the common factors is also, I think, people just don't feel like they want to burden others by sharing about their problems too.
And even as an outsider, so sometimes you're not sure whether to ask your friend about it. You almost feel like by asking them, am I suggesting, and what if I guess wrongly, so to speak? The government has recently announced a slew of new measures in what they call a new national mental health strategy. It sounds very comprehensive. There are more beds, more services offered at GP clinics and things like that. The question here seems to be, we may have all the infrastructure and support, but how do we reach out and connect it to the people who need it? And can those of us on the outside help in that? Because many of us, like me, I have to admit, I don't have a loved one in this situation and I don't really understand it.
With the strategy, of course, like with the different tiers, it helps with people accessing support. There are different avenues, different services, but it's also the general community that if they were to know what's happening to people around them, it becomes that much easier and also timely to intervene. And for that to happen, people on the ground, people around people, needs to better understand what mental health is and what are some of the signs, some of the symptoms, how they can support, etc.
So, Mark, you said you did reach out to a few friends when you were in a situation. You've shared publicly now, but have you found that helpful to you too?
One thing I think that's unique, Ray and myself, is that we are actually talking about it in the first place. Because one thing that's not usually talked about is internal stigma. And internal stigma is basically, I suck. I suck so much, I shouldn't ask for help. It's not just about burdening others, but my problem is not big enough. Or if I even open my mouth to admit that I need some form of help, I failed. I failed myself. For me, at that point, it was more of, I'm already in this, head down, I'm up the creek with no paddle. I'm stuck and I don't want to be stuck. That's why I reached out to my friends at that point. And sometimes that internal stigma is so strong that you're like stuck in a conversation with yourself in a silo.
Closed off to the rest of the world.
You can't
Right.
reach out. You
Yeah.
can't have people reach in. You don't know what to do. And so what do? You
Okay.
do what Ray's father did. You yell. You scream.
As you say it, you were kind of locked away in
Yeah.
your own world. Was that the same for you, Ray? Were there times you felt like the only one dealing with this and you could not get help? You could not reach out?
Yeah, it was quite isolating being in secondary school. It was the developing years, and most teenagers, not an assumption, but I think feeling should be a natural human experience. It felt like everyone around me could genuinely be happy. For me, it was firstly hard to even feel something because I think there was just an accumulation of so many physical sensations and the emotional turmoil that I went through that it came to a point I was very numbed. That really scared me as a teenager.
So, Chris, how can they deal with that? And how can those of us on the outside, we may not know this is happening, what are some of the tips or suggestions you would have for friends who may suspect someone close to them is in a difficult situation?
Typically, we suggest that people look out for a few things. One of them is, of course, the mood, right? When you look at someone around you and you know day to day what's their mood like, and if there's a change, then is that a sign of something? Or even if you compare the person's mood to maybe people around them, do they seem more down than typical? Do they seem like they don't enjoy things as much as people? Do they seem like they get stressed much more than maybe others? So mood's one of them. Behavior's the other thing as well. Like, are there changes in the person's behaviors? Have they been doing certain things more or certain things less than usual? Certain things different from maybe other typical people. The last thing, if we know what could be significant events have happened in a person's life transitions, losses, changes in jobs, unemployment, etc., then there's no harm checking in with the person. Because the worst thing, if you're wrong, you're just wrong, right? And they will tell you that not everything's okay. If you were right, then you might have helped someone.
Ray and Mark, we know both of you are still struggling with your situations, but things are a bit better now. What would help you more? What could help you? And even looking back, at the entire journey, if someone out there listening to this may be in a similar situation, what advice would you have for them?
At this stage in my journey, the help that I have is pretty much sufficient. A lot of the work, I have to do it inside me while my wife holds my hand. So I'm very thankful for her for that. One thing I would encourage people along the way in terms of this help that along my journey I wish I had more of was simply people who know how to listen. And by listen, I don't just mean being quiet and not commenting. I mean active listening, compassion. And believe me lah. Believe what I have to share. Believe what I have to say. Don't every other statement I make question, you sure or not? You sure that happened?
Right.
Because that does happen quite a lot.
Okay.
Mind you, I'm already doubting myself. I'm already at a stage where I have no self-esteem. I'm here at this studio not because I want to make a name, but because other people are struggling. But people do. People do challenge, like, is it that bad? Are you for real? If I could ask for more help, it would be people who listen with compassion for that.
What about you, Ray?
Anyone who is listening to this podcast and is struggling, just want to remind you that by simply existing, you are worthy. That's a fundamental truth that maybe for some of you guys, it's hard to absorb, to internalize. But I hope that you guys can hold on. Things will get better. A mental health journey, right? The struggle, it isn't like a straight line. It goes up and down. For me, 10 years in, and I wish I can say that I'm free, but I'm actually still struggling. I'm someone that is proactively trying to live well. We can be more kind to ourselves. There's this author that I recently started reading. Her name is Brené Brown, and there's a chapter in her book called Daring Greatly. There's a chapter called Understanding and Combating Shame. For all of us, whether diagnosed or not, everyone struggles with their mental health, and I think shame is something that the whole human race kind of experiences. It's just that nobody talks about shame. If you are struggling with a disorder or symptoms of any form of disorder, I think it's also important to sometimes acknowledge that it's okay to be different. If we can show kindness and empathy to people with special needs who are neuroatypical? Do we also acknowledge people who struggle with mental illness as neurodivergent and how they function also very differently at work?
What Ray shared actually brought it to mind that especially if you are a man 35 years old and above, Asian especially, and you find yourself being very angry, you find yourself lashing out because you can't control what's going on, you find things slipping out of your hands, and you just don't know where life is headed, please seek help. I say that because I was a very angry person, and it was exactly my experience. And I find that people my age and Asian men in particular tend to think of ourselves as providers. We've got to be strong. We've got to hold on. And I want to say to you, if you're going through this, that it's okay to seek help, because it's not like you're not strong. Even admitting that you need help is strength. And all you're doing is leaning on someone for a little bit.
Right.
And it will get better after that.
Thank you for sharing that. I think to many of us, mental health is really just a term we may hear about. It doesn't really connect or resonate with us until someone near and dear to us has to deal with it. And even then, many of us may still be uncomfortable with it. So Ray and Mark, thank you so much for coming in. By sharing your story today, I think we really hope to create more awareness of the situation, to have people have a better understanding. And I think you raised a few important points: to not just be a friend, to be an active listener, and to be compassionate. And I think to just be there, an extra shoulder to cry on, to give a bit of support for those who may be in a difficult situation. We always say the help is available. It's probably very hard to make that first call, to call someone and to tell someone, but that is where the journey to recovery will probably begin. So again, thank you all for coming in. For those of you listening in, we hope that our discussion today has just shed more light on the issue, and hopefully it will allow those of us on the outside to also pick up on some of the signs when someone around us is in a difficult situation. The team behind this podcast, Heart of the Matter, is Jacqueline Chan, Joanne Chan, Saya Win, Jesselyn Tan, Tiffany Ang, and Crispina Robert. And I'm Stephen Chia, signing off.